The guitar stopped mid-note. Jimi Hendrix's fingers lifted from the strings. And in that silence, 5,000 people heard what he heard, a child crying. It was August 1969. An outdoor amphitheater in Northern California. Summer heat still hanging in the evening air. The stage lights cut through the dusk, illuminating Jimi Hendrix in the middle of a solo that had the entire crowd transfixed. His Stratocaster sang. Not screamed, sang. The notes bent and curved through the warm air like something alive, something that understood more than words ever could. 5,000 people stood packed together, swaying, lost in the sound. Jimmy's eyes were closed. His body moved with the music in that way only he moved, not performing, but channeling. The solo was building toward its peak, fingers dancing across the fretboard, each note placed with absolute precision disguised as improvisation. And then he stopped. Not a pause for effect. Not a dramatic rest before the climax. A full stop. His fingers pulled away from the strings. The note hung in the air for a moment, then died. Jimmy opened his eyes and turned his head toward the crowd. The band behind him, bass player Billy Cox and drummer Mitch Mitchell, kept playing for 2 more measures before they realized something was wrong. The rhythm guitar stuttered, confused. Then silence spread across the stage like water. 5,000 people stood in sudden quiet, uncertain what was happening. Jimmy lowered his guitar slightly, letting it hang from his shoulder strap. He took 2 steps toward the edge of the stage, peering into the crowd, his hand raised to shield his eyes from the stage lights. "Hold on," he said into the microphone, his voice quiet but clear. "Everyone just, hold on a second." The crowd murmured. Confused. Concerned. A few people called out questions that got lost in the general confusion. Jimmy crouched at the edge of the stage, one hand gripping the monitor speaker for balance, looking down into the front rows. His expression was focused, searching. "Someone's got a kid down there," he said. "And that kid's not okay." Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. To understand what happened next, you need to understand something about Jimi Hendrix that most people never saw. The world knew him as a guitar god. The man who set his instrument on fire. The virtuoso who played with his teeth and behind his back and made sounds no one thought possible. The showman who commanded stadiums. But people who actually knew Jimmy, musicians who jammed with him in small rooms, friends who sat with him in quiet apartments, strangers who encountered him in unexpected places, they knew something else. Jimi Hendrix heard everything. Not just music. Everything. The tremor in someone's voice when they pretended to be fine. The shift in a room's energy when someone felt excluded. The moment when laughter turned forced. He noticed when people were uncomfortable, afraid, lost. And he couldn't ignore it. There's a story, one of dozens, about a session at Electric Lady Studios in 1970. Jimmy was recording, the room full of musicians and engineers and hangers-on, everyone focused on getting the perfect take. They'd been working for hours. Everyone was tired but pushing through. The session bassist's girlfriend was sitting in the corner. Nobody paid attention to her. She was just there, waiting, trying to be invisible. In the middle of a take that was going well, that might have been the one, Jimmy stopped playing. Just stopped. He looked at the bassist. "Man, your lady needs to eat," Jimmy said. "She's been sitting there for 6 hours. We should take a break." The bassist looked confused. "She's fine, Jimmy. Let's finish this take." "Nah," Jimmy said, already setting down his guitar. "We'll get it later. Let's all get some food." He noticed what no one else had noticed. He'd heard what no one else had heard, not words, but presence, discomfort, the silent language of someone trying not to be a burden. That was Jimi Hendrix. He heard everything. Which is why, on that August evening in 1969, in the middle of a guitar solo that 5,000 people were completely absorbed in, he heard one child crying. The amphitheater security moved toward the area Jimmy was pointing to. The crowd parted slightly, people turning to look at each other, trying to understand what was happening. And then they saw a small child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing alone in the crowd, crying, surrounded by hundreds of adults, none of whom had noticed in the press of bodies and the volume of the music. A little girl in a yellow dress, tears streaming down her face, hands reaching upward toward nothing in particular. "Someone get her," Jimmy said into the microphone, still crouched at the stage edge. "Someone help her up here." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Security moved quickly. Within seconds, 2 men were lifting the child over the barrier, passing her up toward the stage. Someone in the crowd, later identified as the girl's older sister, who had lost track of her in the density of people, was shouting, trying to follow. Jimmy set his guitar down on the stage floor. Carefully, with the same precision he used for everything, placing it gently like it was something alive. He walked to the edge of the stage and reached down, taking the crying child from the security guard's hands and lifting her onto the stage beside him. The crowd erupted. Not in applause exactly, but in that collective exhale of 5,000 people realizing what was happening, feeling it in their chests. The little girl stood on the stage, still crying, overwhelmed by the lights and the crowd and the strangeness of suddenly being in the center of everything. Jimmy knelt beside her, making himself small, bringing his face down to her level. The microphone still on, the entire amphitheater could hear him speak to her, his voice gentle and unhurried. "Hey," he said softly. "You're okay now. What's your name?" The child hiccuped, trying to speak through tears. "Sarah. Sarah. That's a beautiful name. I'm Jimmy. You scared?" Sarah nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Yeah, I get scared too sometimes," Jimmy said. "Especially in big crowds. Makes sense to be scared." He sat down fully on the stage, crossing his legs, unbothered by the 5,000 people watching, the band standing awkwardly behind him, the scheduled show completely abandoned. "You know what helps me when I'm scared?" Jimmy asked. Sarah shook her head. "Music," Jimmy said. "But not loud music. Quiet music. The kind you can feel more than hear. You want to try that?" Sarah nodded hesitantly. Jimmy reached for his guitar, still lying on the stage where he'd set it down. He pulled it into his lap without standing, adjusting it across his crossed legs in a position no professional guitarist would ever use. Awkward. Informal. Like a man sitting on a porch, not performing. "This is going to be just for you," Jimmy said to Sarah. "Nobody else. Just you and me. Okay?" "Okay," Sarah whispered. And then Jimi Hendrix began to play. Not the solo he'd been playing when he stopped. Not any song from his catalog. Something simple. Almost childlike in its melody. A lullaby he was inventing in real time, notes soft and rounded, no distortion, no effects, just the pure sound of wood and strings and air. The amphitheater fell completely silent. 5,000 people holding their breath. Sarah's crying slowed. Then stopped. She stood about 3 feet from Jimmy, watching his fingers move across the fretboard, her small chest still hitching with the aftermath of tears but her eyes wide and focused. Jimmy played for maybe 90 seconds. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would ever be considered virtuoso guitar work. Just simple, clean notes arranged into a melody that felt like safety. When he finished, he looked up at Sarah and smiled, not the confident stage smile, but something softer, more private. "Better?" he asked. "Better," Sarah said and smiled back. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. He stood up, still holding his guitar, and offered Sarah his hand. She took it. Together they walked to the edge of the stage where her older sister was being held by security, crying herself now, reaching up frantically. Jimmy helped Sarah down to the security guard, who passed her back over the barrier to her sister. The 2 girls grabbed each other, the older one holding the younger one tight, both crying again but differently now. Jimmy stood at the stage edge watching them for a moment. Then he turned back to face the crowd. 5,000 people erupted in applause. Not the excited screaming of a rock concert. Something deeper. Sustained. Some people were crying. Jimi walked back to center stage. He picked up his guitar, slung it over his shoulder, adjusted the strap. The band behind him was waiting, watching him, uncertain what to do. He stepped up to the microphone. "We're going to play something different now," he said. "Something quieter. If that's okay with you all." The crowd roared approval. Jimi turned to Billy and Mitch. "You know Little Wing?" They nodded. "Let's do that," Jimi said. Slow. Really slow. For Sarah. And they did. The next 15 minutes of that concert were unlike anything Jimi Hendrix had ever played publicly. Little Wing. Stretched out, deconstructed, rebuilt into something meditative. No pyrotechnics. No showmanship. Just music that wrapped around 5,000 people and held them gently. People who were there still talk about it. Not because it was technically impressive, though it was, but because something shifted in that amphitheater. The energy changed from performance to ritual, from entertainment to something sacred. After Little Wing, Jimi played 3 more songs. All slow. All careful. All colored by what had happened. When the concert ended, shorter than scheduled, missing several planned songs, the crowd didn't disperse immediately. They stood for a long time. Some sat down on the grass. Many were crying. Backstage afterward, Jimi was quiet. Not upset. Just internal. A journalist who was there for an interview approached him, asking about the child, about stopping the show. "Did you know her?" the journalist asked. "No," Jimi said. "So why stop? You had 5,000 people in the palm of your hand. That solo was building to something incredible." Jimi looked at the journalist for a long moment. Then he said something that the journalist would quote for the rest of his life. "Man, what's the point of making sound if you can't hear when someone needs silence?" What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. The story of that night spread slowly. This was 1969, no internet, no viral videos. Just people telling people. Musicians telling other musicians. Someone who was there telling someone who wasn't. And each time it was told, it meant something slightly different. To some musicians, it became a story about priorities. About remembering that music serves people, not the other way around. To some fans, it became a story about presence. About someone actually seeing them, hearing them, noticing when they're not okay. To some critics, it became ammunition, evidence that Jimi was more than technique, more than innovation, more than the mythology building around him. But to Jimi himself, it was just Tuesday. Because here's what most people never understood about Jimi Hendrix. He didn't think he was doing anything exceptional by stopping that show. He heard a child crying. Of course he stopped. What else would anyone do? That's not humility. That's just how he saw the world. There's no footage of that night. No recording. The concert wasn't filmed. The only documentation is the testimonies of people who were there and a brief mention in a local newspaper the next day. 3 sentences that completely missed the significance of what happened. But the guitar Jimi used that night, that specific Stratocaster, he kept. When he died a year later, his brother found it in Jimi's apartment with a piece of tape on the case. Written in Jimi's handwriting. Sarah. Just that. Just her name. The guitar was never sold. Jimi's family donated it to a children's hospital in Seattle, where it sits in a display case in the pediatric wing. There's a small plaque beside it that reads, "Sometimes the most important thing a musician can do is stop playing." Sarah grew up. She became a music teacher. She never forgot that night, though for years she thought maybe she'd imagine how gentle he was, how unhurried, how completely he'd made 5,000 people disappear so she could feel safe. When students ask her why she teaches music, she tells them about a man who stopped a concert because he heard one child crying. Who sat on a stage and played a lullaby for an audience of one while thousands waited. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The song Jimmy was playing when he stopped. He never finished it. Not that night. Not ever. When musicians ask why, the ones who knew him say the same thing, because some moments aren't meant to be completed. Some moments are meant to be interrupted. That's how you know they mattered. Real mastery isn't making others watch you play. It's knowing when to stop playing and just listen.